Smoke still clung to Drevon's crimson scales as he flew toward his home planet. 3 years of battle had aged him in ways that showed in the set of his wings and the weariness behind his golden eyes. The war against the swarm was supposed to last another 6 months, but their final fortress had crumbled faster than anyone expected. Victory tasted like ash in his mouth as he thought of all the young warriors who would never see home again. Piranthos grew larger in his vision, the red and gold planet where dragons had ruled for 10,000 years. His palace sat at the peak of Mount Severance, its black towers piercing the clouds like claws. Drevon had left specific instructions before departing. His household staff would maintain the grounds, his guards would protect the borders, and Claire, his human maid, would keep his personal chambers ready for his return. Humans were strange creatures. Most species in the galaxy considered them unpredictable, emotional, and dangerously clever. Drevon had hired Claire 5 years ago after she impressed him by reorganizing his entire library in a way that actually made sense. She came from Earth, a world so hostile that simply surviving there created beings capable of thriving anywhere. She never cowered before him like other servants, never treated him as a god-emperor, just as someone who needed his furniture dusted and his floors cleaned. The landing courtyard appeared empty as Drevon descended. His wings caught the thermal currents, slowing his massive body until his claws touched stone with barely a sound. The silence struck him immediately. Where were the guards? Protocol demanded at least 12 warriors standing watch at all hours. The braziers burned low, casting weak shadows across the polished granite. Drevon folded his wings and walked toward the main entrance. The great doors stood open, another violation of protocol. His tail swept behind him, scales scraping against stone as irritation built in his chest. Had his entire household grown lazy in his absence, he would have words with the captain of the guard about this disgrace. The throne room echoed with emptiness. Dust motes drifted through beams of light falling from the high windows. His throne sat undisturbed, the golden seat cold and waiting. No courtiers rushed to greet him. No servants bowed and scraped. The palace felt like a tomb, abandoned and forgotten. A sound reached his ears, faint, but unmistakable, music, and voices, many voices, chattering and laughing. The noise came from deeper in the palace, from the grand hall where he held state dinners and received foreign dignitaries. Drevon's instincts sharpened. Had someone seized his palace during the war? Impossible. His orbital defenses would have detected any invasion force. He moved through familiar corridors, noticing odd changes as he went. Colorful drawings covered some walls, crude sketches that looked like a child's work. Toys lay scattered in corners, small wooden figures and soft cloth dolls. What madness had infected his home? The grand hall doors came into view and Drevon stopped short. Bright banners hung across the entrance, decorated with suns and moons and strange symbols he didn't recognize. The laughter grew louder, mixed with high-pitched squeals of delight. His confusion shifted to anger. Someone had turned his palace into a carnival. Drevon pushed the doors open with one massive claw. The scene before him froze his breath in his throat. The grand hall, designed to hold 300 guests for formal occasions, was filled with children. Dragon hatchlings, dozens of them, ran between tables and chairs. They played games, chased each other, tumbled in mock fights. More hatchlings sat in groups while adults read to them or taught them letters. But these weren't his noble's children. These hatchlings wore simple clothes, many showing signs of injury or illness. Some were too thin, others bore scars from weapons, war orphans. The realization hit him like a physical blow. And there in the center of the chaos sat Claire. She held a large book in her lap while 7 young dragons clustered around her, their eyes wide as she read. Her brown hair was tied back in a practical braid, her simple dress covered by an apron stained with food and paint. She looked completely at ease, as if sitting among dragon children in an emperor's palace was the most natural thing in the world. Other humans moved through the hall, adults Drevon didn't recognize. A tall man with gray hair supervised a group of hatchlings practicing their letters. A young woman with dark skin carried a tray of food, distributing meals to hungry mouths. An older woman with kind eyes wrapped bandages around a hatchling's injured wing. Claire's voice carried across the hall as she read, her tone animated and warm. The hatchlings hung on every word there, tails swishing with excitement. She reached the end of a page, and one young dragon, no more than 2 years old, tugged on her sleeve and demanded she continue. That was when Claire looked up and saw him. Her eyes met his across the crowded hall. For a moment neither moved. Then she carefully closed the book, whispered something to the hatchlings around her, and stood. She walked toward him with steady steps, showing no fear, no shame, no hesitation. Drevon's mind raced with questions, with fury, with disbelief. His palace had become an orphanage. His grand hall was a nursery. His human maid had transformed his home into something he couldn't comprehend. Claire stopped 3 paces away and met his gaze directly. Her expression remained calm, almost gentle, as if she was dealing with one of the children rather than an emperor who could incinerate her with a single breath. "Welcome home," she said quietly. "I imagine you have questions." Drevon's claws scraped against the marble floor, the sound sharp enough to make several nearby hatchlings freeze in their play. Questions? He had thousands of questions, each one fighting to escape his throat first. What he managed instead was a low growl that made the air vibrate. "Explain," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Explain why my palace looks like a breeding den." Claire didn't flinch. She had never been good at showing proper fear, something that had annoyed him when she first started working here. Now it just added to his frustration. "You were gone," she said simply. "They were dying, someone had to do something." Drevon's eyes swept the room again, taking in details he had missed in his initial shock. Not all the hatchlings were dragons. Some had different body shapes, unusual colorings. His breath caught as he spotted movement in a far corner where something small and chitinous scuttled between the legs of a table. "Is that a swarm larva?" 17 of them, actually," Claire said, following his gaze. "They were left behind when the swarm retreated from the mining colonies. Without the collective to guide them, they just wandered until they died. I found the first 3 by accident when I was checking on refugee camps." Drevon felt his inner fire rising, heat building in his chest. "You brought enemy creatures into my home." "They're children," Claire corrected gently. "The war isn't their fault." A small dragon barely passed. Hatching age wandered over to them. She had bright green scales and one eye was covered by a healing scar. She looked up at Drevon with the fearless curiosity only the very young possessed. "Are you the Emperor?" she asked, her voice high and sweet. Drevon stared down at her. "I am." "Claire said you were fighting bad people to keep us safe. Did you win?" The question, asked with such innocent trust, struck something deep in his chest. Before he could answer, Claire knelt down and whispered to the hatchling. "Why don't you go help Owen with the reading group? The Emperor and I need to talk." The young dragon nodded and scampered away. Claire stood and gestured toward a side door. "Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private. I can show you what we've done here." Drevon wanted to refuse, to demand she explain herself right here in front of everyone. But some part of him, the part that had trusted her enough to leave her in charge of his home, made him follow. They walked through hallways he knew by heart, except now they were different. Children's artwork covered the walls. Small beds lined rooms that used to store weapons. The sound of young voices echoed from every direction. Claire led him to what used to be his private armory. Now it was a classroom. Rows of desks filled the space where swords and spears once hung. A chalkboard covered one wall, covered in simple words and pictures. The tall, gray-haired man Drevon had seen earlier was helping a mixed group of dragon and swarm young practice writing their names. "This is Owen," Claire said. "He was a teacher on a colony world before the war destroyed his school. Now he teaches here." Owen looked up, saw Drevon, and his face went pale. He bowed quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Your Majesty, I apologize for any offense." "He's not here to hurt anyone," Claire interrupted. "Continue your lesson." They moved on. The war room, where Drevon had planned military campaigns with his generals, was now filled with small beds and cribs. Infant dragons and even tinier swarm larvae slept peacefully, watched over by a woman with kind eyes who hummed a soft lullaby. "That's Ruth," Claire explained. "She's a medic. Many of these children were injured or sick when we found them. She saved most of their lives." Drevon's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His home, his palace, the seat of his power, had been turned into something else entirely. Part of him burned with rage at the presumption. Part of him felt something else, something he couldn't quite name. Claire led him to the treasure vault. The massive door stood open, another breach of security that made his scales itch. Inside, the piles of gold and precious gems looked smaller than he remembered. Claire walked to a desk someone had set up in the corner and picked up a thick leather book. "Every coin spent is recorded here," she said, opening the book to show neat columns of numbers. "Food, medicine, clothing, educational supplies, I documented everything. The families of some children have been found and contacted. We're arranging their safe return. Others have no one left. This has become their home." Drevon took the book with one claw and flipped through pages. The record-keeping was meticulous, almost obsessive in its detail. Every expense justified, every child documented with name and origin and current status. "You spent my fortune on orphans," he said flatly. "I borrowed your fortune," Claire corrected. "I intend to pay it back once the children are settled. I have plans for fundraising and—" "How?" Drevon's voice rose, making the vault ring with echoes. "How did you think this was acceptable? I left you to maintain my home, not turn it into a charity house." Claire closed the book and looked at him with those steady human eyes. "You hired me because humans see problems differently than dragons," she said. "On Earth, we fought wars for thousands of years. We killed each other over land, resources, beliefs, pride. We learned something important, but we learned it too late for too many people." "And what was that?" "Caring for your enemy's children ends wars faster than killing their soldiers." The words hung in the air between them. Drevon wanted to argue, to explain why this was different, why traditions and protocols mattered. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of battlefields covered in bodies. Maybe it was the sound of a child's laughter drifting from somewhere in his palace. "This will cause a scandal," he said finally. "The nobles will demand your execution for treason." "I know," Claire said, "but I'd do it again." Sleep refused to come that night. Drevon lay in his personal chambers, the only part of the palace that remained unchanged. His bed felt too large, too empty. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of that small green dragon asking if he had won. He had won, but what exactly had he won? Before dawn, he rose and walked through the palace in silence. The children slept peacefully in their makeshift dormitories. Claire had arranged guards, he noticed, human volunteers who watched over the young ones through the night. They bowed nervously when they saw him pass, uncertain if they should flee or stand their ground. In the converted war room, Drevon found Claire sitting beside a crib where a swarm larva twitched in its sleep. She held a small bottle and a cloth, cleaning the young creature's carapace with gentle hands. She looked up when his shadow fell across her. "Nightmares," she said quietly. "This one lost its entire clutch when their hive was destroyed. It cries out sometimes, even in sleep." Drevon watched as she worked, her human hands so small and fragile compared to his claws, yet moving with such care. The larva settled under her touch, its chittering fading to soft clicks. "Why?" he asked. The question came out rougher than he intended. "Why risk everything for creatures that aren't even your species?" Claire set down the bottle and looked at him with tired eyes. "Because someone did it for me once," she said. "When Earth was breaking apart in civil wars, when my city burned and my family died, aliens came. They didn't have to. We were killing each other over things that seem stupid now. But they came anyway, pulled survivors from the rubble, gave us food and shelter and hope." She returned her attention to the sleeping larva. "I was 8 years old when dragon relief ships landed in what was left of my home. Your people, Emperor. Dragons who decided human children were worth saving even though we were violent and primitive and probably not worth the effort. I grew up in a refugee camp run by your kind. That's why I learned your language, why I came to Paranthos, why I wanted to work in your palace. Drevon had no memory of Earth relief missions. They had happened decades ago, minor operations ordered by his father. Just another box checked on a list of diplomatic obligations. "You're repaying a debt," he said. "No," Claire stood and faced him. "I'm passing forward a gift, there's a difference." Morning brought the first of many problems. A messenger ship landed in the courtyard, its crew demanding to speak with the Emperor about urgent military matters. Drevon met them in the throne room, painfully aware of the sounds of children echoing from nearby halls. General Corvus, a scarred veteran who had served 3 generations of emperors, knelt before the throne. "Your Majesty, we have secured the border worlds and established peacekeeping forces. The swarm survivors have retreated to their core systems. However, we've received disturbing reports about your palace. Rumors of enemy creatures within your walls, of humans operating without oversight." "The rumors are true," Drevon interrupted. Corvus's head jerked up, his eyes wide with shock. Before he could speak, a crash echoed from the grand hall, followed by childish laughter. The general's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. "Stand down," Drevon commanded. "You will not threaten the children under my protection." "Children, Your Majesty, if the swarm has infiltrated." "They are orphans, General, war refugees being cared for by my household staff. You will spread no rumors and make no threats. Is that clear?" Corvus looked like he wanted to argue, but decades of discipline held his tongue. He bowed stiffly and withdrew, though his expression promised this conversation was far from over. The nobles arrived by midday. Word had spread faster than Drevon anticipated. 6 of the most powerful dragon lords descended on his palace, demanding audience. They gathered in the council chamber, a room Claire had mercifully left untouched. Lord Brashen spoke first, his bronze scales gleaming with outrage. "This is madness, Your Majesty. Your human servant has committed treason. She has stolen imperial resources, harbored enemy combatants, and brought shame upon your house. She must face execution immediately." "She saved children," Drevon said evenly. "That is not treason." "She saved Swarm," Brashen's voice rose. "Those creatures killed thousands of our young in battle. Their kind destroyed 7 colony worlds, and now they sleep in your palace, eating your food, living under your protection." Lady Sareth, older than the others and missing half her tail from old battle wounds, spoke more quietly. "Your Majesty, I understand compassion. I lost my own hatchlings to this war. But there are proper channels for such things. Charity houses exist. Relief organizations handle refugees. Your maid overstepped every boundary of her station." "Did she?" Drevon looked at each noble in turn. "When the war began, I asked this. Council, what would become of the orphans? Do you remember what you told me?" Silence greeted his question. "You said they were acceptable casualties, collateral damage, unfortunate but necessary losses. Every one of you voted to allocate 0 resources to civilian relief because we needed those funds for weapons." "That was a strategic decision," Brashen protested. In wartime, we created an entire generation with nothing to lose," Drevon cut him off. "Claire showed me something last night. Letters, hundreds of them from parents across the sector thanking me for sheltering their children, from families on both sides of this conflict who thought their young ones were dead." He produced a stack of papers and dropped them on the council table. "She's been coordinating with refugee networks, tracking missing children, reuniting families. She's done more for peace in 6 months than our diplomats managed in 3 years of war." Lord Brashen grabbed one of the letters and read it, his expression darkening. "This is from a swarm hive mother. She thanks you for your mercy and wisdom. She calls you a leader who rises above hatred." He threw the letter down. "Don't you see? She's made you look weak, like you pity the enemy." "Perhaps I do," Drevon said quietly. "Perhaps that's not weakness." The chamber erupted in arguments. Nobles shouted over each other, voices rising in anger and fear and confusion. Through it all, Drevon heard something else. A child singing somewhere in the palace, voice high and pure and utterly unconcerned with politics or war or the cost of compassion. The council meeting lasted 3 hours and solved nothing. Drevon dismissed the nobles with orders to return the following day, ignoring their protests. He needed time to think, time to understand what Claire had built in his absence and what it meant for his empire. He found her in the gardens, teaching a group of mixed children how to plant seeds. Dragon hatchlings worked alongside swarm larvae, their small hands and claws pushing dirt around with equal clumsiness. Claire demonstrated the proper depth for each seed, her patience endless as she corrected mistakes and praised efforts. "They hate me," she said without looking up as Drevon approached. "The nobles, I could hear them shouting from here." "Some do," Drevon admitted. "Others are frightened of what this means." "And you," Claire finally met his gaze. "What do you feel?" Drevon settled onto the grass, his massive body folding with surprising grace. The children paused in their work to stare at him before Claire gently redirected their attention back to the planting. "I feel confused," he said honestly. "You've created something I don't fully understand. On one hand, you violated every protocol and tradition my empire stands upon. On the other hand..." He watched a young dragon help a swarm larva reach a watering can, the two working together without hesitation or fear. "On the other hand, I cannot remember the last time I saw such simple kindness." Claire brushed dirt from her hands and sat beside him, tiny compared to his bulk but somehow his equal in this moment. "Your Majesty, may I tell you what I learned from living on Earth during the wars?" "Go ahead." "Killing is easy," she said. "Any creature can destroy. It takes no special intelligence or courage to end a life. But building something that lasts, creating peace that survives beyond one generation, that's the hardest thing any species can attempt." She gestured at the children. "These young ones don't remember why the war started. They don't care about old grievances or territorial disputes. All they know is that someone gave them food when they were hungry, bandaged their wounds when they hurt, and told them they mattered. When they grow up, what do you think they'll remember? The causes of the war or the dragon emperor who gave them sanctuary?" "You're asking me to see this as a political opportunity," Drevon said. "I'm asking you to see it as a choice between two futures. In one, we send these children back to broken homes and shattered communities where they'll grow up hating the people who killed their families. In 30 years, we fight the same war again with a new generation of soldiers who have fresh reasons to hate." She picked up a seed and held it between her fingers. "Or we plant something different. We show them that yesterday's enemies can become today's friends. We teach them that survival doesn't require destroying everyone else. It's slower, harder, messier than war, but it actually ends the cycle." Before Drevon could respond, Owen rushed into the garden, his face flushed with urgency. "Claire, we have a situation. You need to come now." They followed him to the main gates where a crowd had gathered. A swarm diplomatic shuttle sat in the courtyard, its hull still showing battle damage. Several adult swarms stood near the ship, their chitinous bodies tense and ready to fight or flee. Dragon guards surrounded them with weapons drawn, creating a standoff thick with tension. Claire pushed through the guards despite their protests. Drevon followed, curious to see how she would handle this crisis. One of the swarm, larger than the others with markings that suggested rank, clicked its mandibles in rapid patterns. Claire listened, then responded in the same clicking language. Drevon's translator implant picked up fragments of the conversation. "The larvae, you sent coordinates. They live, you swear this truth." "I swear it," Claire responded in clicks. "Your children are safe. They eat, they learn, they play. No harm has come to them." The swarm leader's entire body seemed to shudder. The clicking became faster, almost frantic. "Show me, I must see with my own eyes." Claire looked back at Drevon, a silent question in her expression. This was his palace, his decision. He could refuse, could send these former enemies away, could maintain the proper distance between victor and defeated. Instead, he nodded. Claire led the swarm delegation inside, the dragon guards following with weapons still ready. They walked through the palace halls where children's laughter echoed off stone walls. The swarm clicked constantly among themselves, their antennae twitching with what Drevon's implant translated as confusion and hope. In the converted war room, 17 swarm larvae slept in specially designed cribs. Ruth sat in a corner, knitting something small and soft. She looked up as they entered, saw the adult swarm, and froze. "It's all right," Claire said softly. "They're here to see their young." The swarm leader approached the cribs slowly, as if afraid they might disappear. Its claws reached out and gently touched one sleeping larva. The clicking that emerged from its mandibles made Drevon's translator crackle with words like relief and gratitude and disbelief. "You kept them alive," the swarm leader clicked. "The war, we thought all the colony larvae were lost, dead or scattered beyond finding. You gathered them, you fed them. Why?" Claire stepped forward. "Because they're children," she said simply. "That's all the reason needed." The other swarm had moved to different cribs, touching their young with trembling claws. One of the larvae woke and chirped, happily at seeing an adult of its own kind, reaching up with tiny limbs. The adult swarm gathered it close, holding it with a tenderness that looked strange on such a fearsome form. The delegation leader turned to Drevon, its massive body lowering in what looked like a bow. "We came prepared to negotiate for hostages," it clicked. "We expected demands, ransoms, political leverage. Instead we find care, protection, a dragon emperor who shows mercy to his enemies' offspring." "Don't thank me," Drevon said. "Thank the human who refused to let children die while adults argued over borders." The swarm leader's antennae focused on Claire. "You are human from the death world." "I am." "Your kind understands suffering. You know what it means to lose everything." The clicking slowed, became almost reverent. "The hive will remember this. Your name will be spoken with honor in our histories." Claire smiled, tired but genuine. "I don't need honor. I just need you to remember that your young ones survived because someone chose compassion over revenge. Remember that when you're deciding how to treat your enemies tomorrow." News of the swarm delegation's visit spread across the sector within hours. By evening, Drevon's communication system overflowed with messages from allies and enemies alike, all demanding to know what was happening in his palace. Some praised his mercy. Others questioned his sanity. A few suggested he had been replaced by an imposter because the real emperor would never show such weakness. Drevon sat in his private study, surrounded by screens showing diplomatic messages, military reports, and economic analyses. Claire had been right about one thing. What she had created was no longer just about orphans. It had become a political event with consequences spreading far beyond his palace walls. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Claire entered without waiting for permission, something that would have earned any other servant immediate punishment. She carried a data pad and wore an expression he had learned meant trouble. "The council wants me arrested," she said bluntly. "Lord Brashen filed formal charges: treason, theft of imperial resources, harboring enemy combatants, and about 6 other violations I'm too tired to remember." "I know," Drevon replied. "I received the filing an hour ago." "Are you going to do it?" He studied her face, looking for fear or regret. He found neither. Only calm acceptance of whatever came next. "That depends," he said carefully. "What you've built here, this orphanage, this symbol of peace, it cannot continue as it is. The nobles will tear it apart. The military will demand security protocols that make caring for children impossible. Even if I protect you, the pressure will destroy what you've created." Claire nodded slowly. "I know, I've been thinking about that." She activated the data pad and showed him a document. Drevon read it, his eyes widening as he processed what she was proposing. "You want me to make it official imperial policy?" he asked. "Turn the orphanage into a permanent institution?" More than that, Claire said, her voice gaining strength. I want you to declare the palace a sanctuary of reconciliation, a neutral ground where any war orphan, regardless of species or origin, can find shelter. Make it a symbol of your vision for post-war reconstruction. The nobles will revolt. Some will, Claire agreed, but others will see the opportunity. Lady Sareth lost her children. Lord Merrick's entire family died in a colony raid. They understand grief. They might understand this too. Drevon stood and walked to the window overlooking his palace grounds. Below, children played in the gardens as the sun set, their laughter rising into the cooling air. Dragon and Swarm, former enemies, chasing each other in a game that had no winners or losers, just joy. If I do this, he said quietly, I change everything. The Empire will never be the same. Our relationship with the Swarm, our military doctrine, our entire approach to conflict resolution, all of it shifts. Yes, Claire said simply. I could lose my throne. The noble houses might unite against me. Civil war is possible. Also, yes. Drevon turned to face her. Why should I risk everything for your vision of peace? Claire met his gaze without hesitation. Because you already know it's right. You've known since you saw that first child ask if you were the kind emperor. You've known since the Swarm delegation bowed to you in gratitude. You've known every moment you've watched children who should be enemies playing together without hate. She stepped closer, her small frame radiating intensity. You won the war, Emperor. You proved your empire's strength. But strength without wisdom is just violence waiting to happen again. You have a chance to win something harder than any. Battle, you can win a future where children don't grow up planning revenge for their parents' deaths. And if I fail, if this creates more conflict rather than solving it, then at least you tried, Claire said. At least you chose hope over fear. That's more than most leaders ever manage. Drevon looked at the document again, reading the proposed terms. An imperial sanctuary funded by treasury resources, staffed by volunteers from all species, dedicated to healing the wounds of war through caring for its youngest victims. It was ambitious, naive, and possibly brilliant. I need to think, he said finally. Claire nodded and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Your Majesty, whatever you decide, thank you for not executing me on sight when you arrived. That showed more open-mindedness than I had any right to expect. After she left, Drevon sat in darkness and thought about the future. He thought about his father, who had ruled with iron certainty and left an empire strong but surrounded by enemies. He thought about the young soldiers who had died under his command, fighting over territories that now seemed meaningless. He thought about the small green dragon who had asked if he won and realized he still didn't know how to answer. Near midnight, he made his decision. He summoned his personal scribe and began dictating an announcement that would echo across every world in the sector. By dawn, the message reached every major government, military installation, and news network. The Dragon Emperor declared his palace a sanctuary of reconciliation, dedicated to sheltering and healing war orphans regardless of species or political affiliation. He appointed Claire as director of sanctuary operations and invited other species to send representatives to help manage the facility. More shocking than the announcement itself was the second part. Drevon personally requested that the Swarm leadership send delegates to discuss terms for permanent peace, using the care of their shared orphans as the foundation for negotiation. The sector erupted in response. Some called him visionary, others called him a fool. 3 noble houses immediately declared they would not support the sanctuary financially. 5 others quietly sent messages pledging funds and resources. When Claire read the announcement, she found Drevon in the throne room, staring at the empty seat of power. You did it, she said voice thick with emotion. You actually did it. I chose to try, Drevon corrected. Whether it works remains to be seen. It will work, Claire said with certainty. Because now it's not just my dream, it's official imperial policy. That makes it real in a way I could never achieve alone. Drevon looked at his human maid. this small creature from a violent world who had somehow changed the course of an empire without firing a single shot. "Claire, I have a question." "Yes." "When you came to work for me, was this always your plan? Did you intend from the beginning to turn my palace into a sanctuary?" Claire smiled, a mysterious expression that gave away nothing. "I came here to clean floors and organize libraries, Your Majesty. Everything else just happened because someone needed to do something, and you were away at war." Drevon suspected there was more to the story, but he decided some mysteries could remain unsolved. Outside, children were waking to their first day in an official sanctuary, safe and protected by imperial decree. That felt like enough truth for one morning. 3 months passed before the first formal peace talks began. The swarm sent a delegation of 12, including the hive leader who had visited to see the larvae. Dragon nobles attended reluctantly, their distrust obvious in every gesture and word. Representatives from neutral species arrived to mediate, curious about this unprecedented approach to diplomacy. They met in the Grand Hall, the same room where children had played when Drevon first returned. The young ones had been moved to a new wing, specially constructed with funds donated by a surprising alliance of merchants, religious groups, and even some military officers who had lost family to the war. Drevon watched as ancient enemies sat across tables from each other, mandibles clicking against dragon growls in heated debate. Lord Brashen had refused to attend, still bitter about the sanctuary's existence. But Lady Sareth sat at the negotiating table, her eyes sharp and her questions pointed. She had visited the orphanage twice, spending hours with children who reminded her of her own lost hatchlings. The talks nearly collapsed on the fourth day when a border dispute threatened to reignite hostilities. Drevon called for a recess and found himself walking through the sanctuary afterward, seeking clarity in the chaos. He encountered Owen teaching a mixed class about stellar navigation, using a scale model of the sector that children manipulated with eager hands. "In the old days," a young swarm clicked, "my hive and your flight would have fought over this system. Now we share it," a dragon hatchling replied, moving their models to demonstrate cooperative mining operations. Drevon watched them solve in minutes what the adults had argued about for hours. Children saw possibilities where warriors saw only threats. He returned to the negotiations with renewed purpose. By the end of the second week, they had drafted a preliminary treaty. It was incomplete, full of compromises that satisfied no one completely, but it was something. More importantly, it was written in the same building where former enemies' children slept safely, a constant reminder of what they were fighting to preserve. Claire rarely attended the talks, focusing instead on expanding the sanctuary's operations. She had recruited staff from 6 different species, all trained in her methods of conflict resolution and trauma care. The sanctuary had become famous across the sector, drawing visitors from worlds that had nothing to do with the Dragon Swarm War but faced their own conflicts. "You have requests for tour," Owen informed Claire one morning, showing her a list that made her eyes widen. "Delegations from the Crystalline Confederacy, the Nomad fleets, even some human colony worlds asking how we manage cross-species integration." "We're not a museum," Claire said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Though maybe we could host educational exchanges, let others learn what we've figured out." Ruth joined them, carrying a medical report that showed declining trauma symptoms in the sanctuary's oldest residents. "They're healing," she said simply. "Not just their bodies, their minds, their hearts. Children who couldn't speak when they arrived are laughing now. Ones who had violent nightmares every night sleep peacefully. This works, Claire. What you built actually works." Claire looked around at the sanctuary she had created from desperation and stubbornness. It had grown beyond her wildest imaginings, becoming something that belonged to more than just her or Drevon or even the children themselves. It belonged to a future where different species could coexist without destroying each other. The treaty was signed on a clear morning when both moons hung visible in the sky. Drevon and the Swarm High Collective affixed their marks to the document while cameras from a dozen news organizations recorded every moment. The terms were simple compared to the complex politics behind them. Borders would be respected. Resources would be shared. Orphans would be protected by both sides. Future disputes would be mediated before military action was considered. Most importantly, both empires agreed to establish sanctuaries similar to Drevon's palace, places where healing could occur and where the next generation could learn different ways of being. After the signing, Drevon found Claire standing in the gardens, watching children play. A crowd had gathered for the ceremony, but she had slipped away, never comfortable with public attention. "You changed the galaxy," Drevon said, settling beside her. "A human maid who decided orphans were more important than protocol." "I didn't change anything," Claire replied. "I just refused to ignore suffering when I could do something about it. You're the one who made it real by backing my insanity with imperial authority." A small dragon and a swarm larva ran past, chasing a ball made of woven grass. They had invented a game that required cooperation, neither one able to succeed without helping the other. Their laughter mixed in the air, a sound that would have been impossible a year ago. "The nobles still hate me," Claire said. "Half the military thinks I'm a spy. Some religious groups claim I'm disrupting the natural order." "True," Drevon agreed. "But the other half call you a visionary. Children sing songs about the human who saved them, and 3 other species have already requested you help them establish similar programs." Claire turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "Are you giving me permission to leave, to spread this to other worlds?" "I'm giving you a choice," Drevon said. "Stay here and continue building what you started, or take your knowledge to those who need it. Either way, you will have my full support and protection." Claire considered this, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she smiled. "I think I'll stay," she said. "At least for now. There's still so much work to do here. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't let the nobles turn this place back into a traditional palace. You don't trust me to maintain your standards. You hired me to dust furniture, Your Majesty. I've already exceeded my job description by several magnitudes. What's a little more?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching the future take shape in the form of playing children. The war had ended not with a crushing victory or bitter defeat, but with the radical notion that yesterday's enemies could become tomorrow's friends. Years later, historians would debate the Treaty of Paranthos and analyze the political factors that made peace possible. But those who were there, who saw children's laughter replace the sounds of battle, knew the truth. Peace came because one human refused to let children die while waiting for adults to solve their problems. Drevon would rule for 3 more decades, his reign remembered as the Age of Reconciliation. He would build 17 more sanctuaries across dragon-controlled space and help establish 43 others in neutral territories. But his first sanctuary, the one Claire had created without permission in his own palace, remained the most famous. And Claire, she became director of the Imperial Sanctuary Network, traveling the galaxy to teach others her methods. But she always returned to that first sanctuary, to the palace where she had once cleaned floors, and where she now helped heal a broken galaxy one child at a time. The green dragon with the scarred eye grew up to become a diplomat, specializing in post-conflict reconstruction. When asked what inspired her career, she would always tell the same story about an emperor who returned from war to find his palace transformed by compassion, and a human who believed that caring for children was the bravest act possible.